Internet culture of the early 2000s is truly nostalgic, whether it's creepypastas or... well, that's all I really paid attention to back then. Maybe that's why today's topic has had a place in my mind since. You know what? Let's just get into it. This is the history of the Rake. The Rake has honestly stuck with me since I first heard about it at around the age of 10. It was the first cryptid I had ever heard of that wasn't a benign creature. I of course knew of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, but these creatures did not seek to harm others as far as I knew. The Rake, on the other hand, had an evil benevolence about itself. Firstly, let's start with the stories that landed this creature the mainstream spotlight that it has today. The first instance of this creature comes from a mariner's log back in 1691. This is also the first time it was ever called by name, so as far as we know, there could be stories dating even further back that we have yet to find, because its name or likeness has been lost in translation. This log is as short and ambiguous as it is chilling. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again. At the request of the Rake. There would be no further mention of the Rake for centuries. The next two entries actually don't even mention it by name, but is believed to be the same creature depicted previously, as it has extreme similarities in its characteristics and psychological torment. The first one comes from a journal from 1880 that has been translated from Spanish. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. This next quote comes from an unknown suicide note from 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. This is not the fault of anyone other than him, for once I awoke and felt his presence. And once I awoke and saw his form. Once again, I awoke and heard his voice and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. It seems that while this creature has not caused physical harm to its victims, it has caused a great deal of psychological trauma. This would all change in the final mention from 2006. This one is a bit lengthy, so I'd like to invite you to grab a snack and take a seat while we dive and unpack this story. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip to Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the bathroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of his bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm, knee tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion, right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. This creature was silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while, just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for some answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a very similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now referred to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-ups. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited us before our last encounter. I set up a digital camera near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night, I'll wake up to see him staring at me. So, what we can take away from this entry is that the writer has uncovered many more stories of the Rake that have yet to be heard. They seem to have devoted 100% of their time to researching the history of this evil known as the Rake. But why? The honest answer is that this story was originally a fictional creepypasta, and the previous stories were created to fit around the original story. But that takes away from the immersion of the video, so let's humor this for a moment. When this creature was first brought to light, the mainstream cryptid sphere did not pay it much mind. But the horror culture of the internet fell into a terrifying and curious relationship with the idea of this monster. Some referred to it as a fallen angel, while others went as far as to claim it was a servant of the legendary Slender Man, who had placed its own psychological torment onto the Rake, turning it into the abomination that it is today. In a classic case of too little too late, the mainstream media did catch hold of this legend and made a few films about it. The one that I am going to step away and watch right now is the 2018 movie aptly named The Rake.
Good night.
Well, that was an hour of my life I'll never get back. To sum up that god-awful movie really quick. Girl's sister has mental illness. Girl's sister says she's doing better. Girl's husband doesn't like girl's sister. Girl's sister says the Rake talks to her. Nobody believes girl's sister. Girl's husband very mad at girl's sister.
You're fucking pathetic.
Everybody fucking dies. I think what we can take away from this experience is that it's okay to keep nostalgic memories in the past. The Rake was a horrific tale for the generation that grew up with its stories, and that's okay for it to just be that. Real or not, there's no denying the influence this creature had on the internet culture of its time. I find it hard to believe that stories of the Skinwalker or the Wendigo would be so prolific in 2023 without the decade-old stories of the Rake. With that being said, I don't have much else for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.